Hello and welcome. We're so glad to see so many of you joining today. Please feel free to type into the chat box who you are and where you're joining us from. And we'll go ahead and get started. So we're so glad that you're here with us. I'm Amy Holm. I'm the Associate Director for the Sibling Leadership Network, or SLN for short. And at the SLN, we encourage the involvement of siblings of people with disabilities, as well as parents, professionals, and people with disabilities. You have arrived at the finale of our conference. We started with pre-conference sessions on Friday, had day 1 and day 2 of the conference, and then we have had their total of 3 post-conference sessions, and this is the 3rd. And it's been a great conference, and I think that we saved the best for last. So we'll take a show of hands, either your virtual hand, your reaction hand, or your real hand. Has anyone else joined us for any of these other sessions in the last couple of days? Great, great, great. We are so glad to see you here then for this final night, and thank you for joining us for the other nights as well. If you've been with us, you know we have had an incredible group of people join us as presenters as well as attendees. We have had people from over 275 people registered from 35 states in the United States and 16 different countries. And I think we might have that many possibly here tonight. We've got a really great group here tonight. It was amazing and really created a sense of community, and I know that that will continue. So just to give a couple of quick announcements, and then I'm eager to turn this over. We do want to keep in touch with you. If you are not yet an SLN member, we have recently launched an SLN membership. It's only $30 for a 2-year membership with a lot of great opportunities. So it's in the chat box if you would like to click there. And then just a few quick housekeeping items. We've set up this Zoom so we can see each other. It's nice for building community. So please feel free to keep your camera on, but use all of your best Zoom etiquette if you can. When speakers are presenting, we will have everybody else muted. If you have questions, you're welcome to type them into the chat box. If we have time at the end, we might be able to allow people to unmute and ask some questions verbally as well. But if you have things you want to add in the chat box, please go ahead and do that. If you are looking, you may be looking at this in gallery view. If you would like to see it in speaker view, so you're always seeing the speaker who's speaking, you can go to your upper right-hand corner where it says view. And one of your options will be for speaker view. And that way the person that's speaking will be highlighted on your computer. That's up to you, of course. There are a few of you that are with us tonight who have pre-registered for continuing education credits. If that's you, we need to verify your attendance at the beginning and the end of this session. And so please make sure we're doing that tonight by checking that you're here at the beginning and the end. So please make sure the name that we see on your Zoom screen is the same name that you registered for the conference with. That's the only way that we will know for sure that you are here at the beginning and the end. If you have any questions, please feel free to put those into the chat box for me about continuing education. But now I really want to turn it over. It's my pleasure to turn this session over. For those of us like me who are coming from the central time zone, maybe we're just comfortably thinking about what we're having for dinner, but for our presenters, and I know for some of our attendees, some people have set alarms to be with us in the middle of the night. Some have stayed up very late at night and some have woken up very early. And we're just so grateful for each of you making the time and energy and commitment to being with us. So I turn it over now to Dr. Ariella Meltzer and the wonderful distinguished panel that she has assembled. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy. Morning or good evening, depending on where you are, or possibly thank you for staying up until the middle of the night or getting up at a ridiculously early hour of the morning just for this event. We have one panelist who's speaking at 4:30 a.m., which is true dedication. So welcome to our panel today on the topic of sibling support in international context. Today, you're going to hear from sibling support providers from Nigeria, India, Taiwan, Australia, Canada, the UK, and the USA. It's really exciting to be able to have an online international panel as part of the Sibling Leadership Network conference for the first time, even though we all wish it wasn't in such awful pandemic circumstances. My name is Ariella Maltzer. I'm based in Sydney, Australia, and I work at the Centre for Social Impact at the University of New South Wales. I'm the lead on the panel today. Here in Australia, it's customary to begin formal events such as this one today with an acknowledgement of the specific Indigenous people whose land you are on, because the Aboriginal people of Australia are actually made up of many different groups and nations. And so today I'd like to acknowledge that I'm on the land of the Camaragal people and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I am the twin sister of a woman with a physical and intellectual disability, and I've been involved in sibling communities for many years. I'm also a social policy researcher with a particular interest in sibling disability research. In my most recent sibling disability research, I've conducted a study of sibling support organisations in Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the UK, and USA. And it's been incredibly interesting to see the similarities and differences between sibling support organisations in these countries. Typically, across all these countries, sibling support organisations are small. They rely on the passion and volunteer hours of of people with disabilities themselves to run them. I'm sure that surprises no one here. They frequently struggle to gain recognition and support for their work, especially where there are much bigger service systems around disability, caregiving, and families that don't always recognise the role that siblings play. Yet, nevertheless, sibling support organisations are resilient and they're persistent. They have provided incredible amounts of support to thousands of siblings across the globe, despite limited resources and funding. And they're continually broaching new and innovative areas, most notably currently turning their attention to increasing the diversity of representation in sibling support. They're truly to be admired. I'm excited for you to hear from some of the sibling support organisations directly today. I'm also really excited to draw on the perspectives of organisations from countries beyond the ones in my recent piece of research. We're going to start today's panel with questions to prompt each of the organisations to introduce themselves and describe their current and planned future work, and also the policy context that they're working in and that enable and constrain them. We're then going to move towards the end of the panel to talking about what future international collaboration in sibling support might look like. This, I think, is one of our most exciting next frontiers in sibling support, especially as we live in an increasingly technologically connected world across borders, which is exactly what's made this panel today possible. So on that note, let's head straight into the discussion. I'm going to ask each person on the panel to introduce themselves and their organisation rather than me doing that for them, because they'll be able to do the best job of that. So Kaya Chu from the International Information Network, Kaya Chu from the Sibling Information Network in Taiwan, would you like to start?
Sure, thank you, Ariella. My name is Kaya Chu. I'm an assistant professor in spatial education at the National Taiwan Normal University. I am also the founder of the Taiwanese Sibling Information Network. Basically, it's providing information on the topic of sibling support. My brother Han was infected by an unknown virus at the age of 5 and had become a person with significant disabilities. And I also want to talk a little bit about COVID responses, if that's okay. So in terms of COVID, it was not until last month that we had a COVID outbreak here in Taiwan. Right now, we're recommended to work from home, but it's not mandatory. All-day programs have been shut down, temporarily closed. So that's major impacting siblings' lives here. We've had the privilege to carry on our usual lives here, but at the same time, disadvantages of not experiencing much last year. So I'm just here to learn from the rest of the world. Thank you.
Thanks, Kaya. Piyush Mishra from Safi in India. Would you like to go next?
Yeah, thanks. So before beginning, I would first like to remember and pray for all the departed souls, for all our disabled siblings and their family members we lost in COVID. Hi, I am Piyush Mishra from India. My younger brother Punit has autism and intellectual disability. I run Sarthi, which is the Sibling Support Network in India. So in essence, Sarthi is there to provide emotional support to siblings, tell them that they are not alone and all their feelings are valid. Sarthi is basically a Sanskrit word which means charioteer, and we are a very young community of siblings. We just completed our first year in April, and our community is first of its kind in India. And we have siblings from the age group of 15 to 50 and even 50 plus from almost all parts of India now. Community-wise, Sarthi is a platform where siblings can connect with other siblings, share their experiences, their ups and downs, and get guidance on how to better navigate the siblinghood journey. Support-wise, we have organized topic-specific sessions, workshops, problem discussion hours, sibling meetups, and we have shared resources focused on adult siblings till now. Thank you.
Thanks, Piyush. Baifi Philippa Peterkins from Siblings of Special Needs Foundation in Nigeria. You're next up.
Hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Barrister Ife Philippa Peterkins. I am a human rights activist and a special needs advocate. I'm also a dual qualified lawyer, so I practice in Nigeria and I practice in England. I have a younger sister called Sandra Onyebuchi. She is 26 and I am a legal guardian. I run the SOS Needs in Nigeria, and I also run a legal guardianship law firm where we help African oriented siblings to be able to understand intellectual property and understand intellectual disability in an African context. So we're still very new. We're still a baby foundation, but we're doing it and we're having to express more now, getting a bit more foundation. So it's really lovely to be here on the panel. Thank you.
Thanks, Evie. Helen Rees from the Sibling Collaborative in Canada. Do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Thank you. Yes, hi, my name's Helen and I'm the co-founder of the Sibling Collaborative in Canada. We provide support to adults, so 18 all the way up to 70 and older, to people who have brothers or sisters with a disability. And we welcome all disabilities from intellectual and developmental to substance use, mental health, illness, and physical illness, physical disabilities, and so on. We're also an emerging organization. We're also very young, only about 3 years old. The Sibling Collaborative came about when my mom and dad passed away and my brother came to live with me and my husband. And I couldn't believe there was no support out there for Canadian siblings. And so that's how the Sibling Collaborative started. And just like Kaya, I wanted to talk a little bit about COVID. In Canada, because of COVID, the federal government gave out quite a bit of funding money that allowed us to move all our programming online. So in a way, COVID was very good for the Sibling Collaborative because it allowed us to expand our reach. And as you know, Canada is a huge country, and so it's really hard to connect siblings from coast to coast with such a huge landmass. And now we're able to do a lot of our work online, and we've connected with so many siblings from all over Canada. And so that's been really great for us. Although COVID was very difficult in Canada, and we're just emerging from about 16 months of a really long and difficult lockdown, which was especially difficult for our brothers and sisters. So thank you for having me here today.
Thank you, Helen. Kate Strom from Siblings Australia. Do you want to go next? You're on mute, Kate. It had to happen. It's a Zoom call, everyone.
Sorry about that. Yes, thank you. And I'd like to also acknowledge that I'm on Kaurna land and pay my respects to their leaders, past, present and emerging. And I founded Siblings Australia in 1999, so 22 years ago, which is a little bit hard to believe. We're the sole peak body in Australia representing siblings, and we take a settings approach. So we provide support to siblings directly, but also through the different settings in which they operate. So we provide education and training to parents and to education, disability, health agencies. 50% of our staff and board are either siblings or parents. And me personally, I grew up with an older sister with cerebral palsy who has now passed away. But I also wrote about my story and other sibling stories in my book, Siblings, Brothers and Sisters of Children with Disability, which was published in the US as being the other one. And in terms of COVID, a little bit like Helen, I think whilst it's just been horrendous for so many people, in many ways, I think it has opened up opportunities. We've moved, we're in the process of moving, we're developing online training for a variety of target audiences, which we maybe wouldn't have done if it hadn't been for COVID. So whilst it caused delays in a lot of the work that we were doing, it also created some opportunities. So thank you, and it's lovely to be here.
Thanks, Kate. Claire Casser from SIBS UK, would you like to go next?
Hello everyone, completely delighted to be here. I am the Chief Executive of SIBS, the UK organisation dedicated to siblings. SIBS is, I would consider, a fairly small organisation. As Ariella pointed out, lots of our sibling organisations are, but we are lucky to have some paid members of staff. So we have 2 full-time, 2 part-time members of staff, and a wonderful dedicated board of trustees, most of which are adult siblings. I'm also a sibling. I have a brother with a learning disability, epilepsy, and some complex mental health challenges. As an organisation, we work across the lifespan with siblings. So we work with young siblings through to adult siblings, a range of services similar to some of the work that Kate's doing in terms of training with professionals, but also offering online training and sessions for adult siblings, but also some work in group development for young siblings too. COVID has been devastating in the UK. I think it's been a really tough 18 months for the country, for siblings, and we've had a massive increase in the need for our services, but also some benefits too, as others have described. I think we've been able to access some small pots of funding that have been COVID related. We've been able to take all of our training online, which is a benefit, because I think we were struggling as a small organisation to work across the UK physically, so that's been to our advantage. We've done some research reports around the impact on young siblings of the pandemic, and also provided some online sessions for adult siblings around specific issues related to the pandemic. So again, really thrilled to be here this evening. Thank you.
Thanks, Claire. And lastly, Katie Arnold from the Sibling Leadership Network in the US.
Thank you, Ariella, and thank you to all the sibling leaders on the panel tonight. My name is Katie Arnold, and I am the Executive Director of the Sibling Leadership Network. I'm coming to you from the United States of America, USA, in the city of Chicago, which is the land of the Potawatomi tribe. And my sibling experience has really shaped my worldview and influenced my career path in a big way. The Sibling Leadership Network, we're the national nonprofit in the USA, founded in 2007. And our mission is to provide siblings of people with disabilities the information, support, and tools to advocate with their brothers and sisters and to promote issues important to them and their entire families. We welcome siblings with any type of disability, and our network now has grown to over 6,000 people across the country, and we have chapters in 27 states. We hope to eventually have a chapter in all 50 states and in the territories as well. And the chapters are really the grassroots of the SLN, where more of the personal contact happens. Each of our chapters has its own feel and flavor, but we're connected, through this national network. We have a number of other sibling organizations in the US that we collaborate with, and many of their leaders serve on our board of directors or are part of one of our chapters. The Sibling Support Project is an important partner of ours, who's has innovative sibling workshops for young siblings and an online community for siblings in their teens, 20s, and adults. Many of you may be on SibNet, which has been so important to connect so many siblings across the country and around the world. Also, other organizations are the Sibling Transformation Project, Siblings with a Mission, as well as Special Olympics and the ARC that do work with siblings. And so we have different organizations that we like to collaborate and partner with. Over the past year and a half, we've experienced, as we talked about, a lot of challenging times with not only the pandemic, but also the economic crisis, as well as a long overdue racial reckoning that's really magnified the systemic injustices that are facing our nation and the world, including highlighting a lot of inequities for the disability community. And the disparities have become even more apparent because of COVID-19. So we've been trying, within the SLN to really adjust our focus to provide more support to siblings during the pandemic. We continue to respond to inquiries that we have for information and to connect people with resources. We've been doing a lot of advocacy for policies that address the needs of people with disabilities and their families, including with the vaccine rollout, also with family leave policies for family caregivers. And we've signed on to and created letters of support for legislation that supports siblings and their families. We've held a number of webinars on COVID-19 vaccine and also on some research on supporting siblings during the pandemic. And we collaborated with our partners from Canada on some of the great research that they have recently done. We're also providing spaces for siblings to share their stories of ways that they're being impacted by COVID-19, because we all know that peer support is so important. And part of that is trying to also hold space for us to globally share, this common experience that we're all facing around the world. We're part of a few grants where we're sharing resources related to COVID-19 for people with disabilities and families. And we have a section on our website with some resources, and Amy's going to put some of those resources in the chat box.
Thanks for that, Katie. Really excellent to hear the introductions from all of the different panelists in the different countries that we're in. I think the reflections on the enablers and constraints that have come with COVID have been really interesting. Certainly in the piece of research that I did, the other comment that came through from a few organisations in a few countries was that lockdowns have recentered focus on the families of people with disabilities, because people with disabilities have often been home with them or separated from them. And so suddenly there's been new organisations thinking about siblings for the first time. Oh, people with disabilities are at home. I wonder how their siblings are doing. So there's a lot of different elements of COVID for siblings. We're going to move on to the next question, which I think Katie's answer has led us into quite nicely, which is the main areas of sibling support that the different organisations have focused on. We've heard a little bit for SLN, but let's head into that answer for some of the others. We might go the other way up this time. So Claire from SIBS UK, do you want to start off by telling us a little bit about what are the areas that you're currently working in, And what are the areas that you want to branch out into in the near future?
Brilliant, thank you. So currently we are working with young and adult siblings. So we have, I guess, two main projects in our work. Our Young Sibs project is an online service for young siblings aged 7 to 17, where they can find information, resources, advice, information about disabilities and conditions, and, you know, scenario sort of issues too. So dealing with some of the tricky stuff about being a young sibling. There's also an option via the website for siblings to ask a sibling advisor about their particular query. So we hear from young siblings every week with particular issues they've got at home or at school or with their friends that they need support with. We also have an adult sibling project. We have currently 18 adult sibling peer support groups running across the UK, to also include one national online group, a number of local groups, and a bereavement support group too. We provide information and guides for adult siblings. We've published a book on self-care for adult siblings. We also run a whole suite of training. So we run training for parents on the needs of young siblings, some of those strategies for dealing with everyday issues. We also run sessions for adult siblings on different areas, so around future planning, mental capacity. We're running some new sessions on advocacy and distance caring, because that's something that's come up much more during the COVID pandemic. We also have a programme for schools work. So we have a Sibs Talk intervention programme for primary age school children, and that provides some one-to-one support for siblings in the school setting. Which kind of takes me quite nicely to what we'd like to do next. And I think what we would really like to do as an organisation is to develop our work with teens. We've done a couple of pilot projects with teenage siblings. We know there's more work to do, and certainly our Sibs Talk intervention programme doesn't quite translate as well to the secondary age school young people, and kind of working and getting traction within secondary schools is a little more difficult here. So that's a challenge for the future. And the other area we'd like to expand, we've developed some accredited training for counsellors on the needs of adult siblings, and I have hopes for the future that we might be able to develop a counselling service for siblings, because what we're noticing in terms of queries coming into the organisation is increasingly complex queries, and a need for counselling from people who have expertise around sibling issues. I think that kind of covers mostly what we do at the moment.
Fabulous, thanks Claire. I think that challenge around how to engage teen siblings in different support structures is one that resonates around the globe. I can see a few nodding heads from the other support providers as well. Kate Strom, do you want to talk about what Siblings Australia is currently doing and what you hope to do next?
I remembered. We, as I said earlier, we do a mix of direct support with siblings, not as much as we would like at the moment, but we're expanding that. We have a program, SibWorks for young children, that we're reviewing at the moment, and then we'll roll out Train the Training for that online training. We're also doing other training for parents and professionals. I run webinars for parents, and we're moving a lot of that online at the moment. We also do research to inform our practice, and we've done a number of research projects on one on adult siblings, one on a mapping project to see what was out there and what was needed. Both of those are on our website. A lot of my work over the last 22 years has involved advocacy, and because siblings tend to be overlooked in policy and practice with very minimal services, I've spent a lot of time on talking to politicians, putting in submissions. And so in many ways, that's probably one of the things that, in looking at what the similarities are with other organisations and what might be a little bit different, is that I think probably we've spent quite a bit more on that advocacy area, sadly, because I would have liked to have spent more time on actual delivering of services, but we are catching up with that delivery. We only recently got some funding for 3 years, which was amazing. So it just has meant that we've been able to expand a little bit. And in terms of what we'd like to do, we'd really like to expand on a lot of the things we're doing. As I said, we're developing e-learning programs for parents and professionals, and also train the trainer for our SibWorks program. And we're developing guidelines for sibling support. And it's interesting that Claire mentioned teens, because I think that's an area that we're really struggling with at the moment. We've approached it in a number of ways, and we've come back from how we were going to do it, and we're exploring other ways now. And so that's a little bit of work in progress, because I think it's such an important age, but it's also one that is the hardest to access, because we can access younger siblings through parents, and we can access adult siblings directly through adult siblings. I mean, even adult siblings are hard to access, but teenagers, I think, even more so. So, yeah, I'll just leave it at that for now, and I can always expand if we need to.
Thanks, Kate. Katie from the SLN, what is the SLN up to now and in the future?
Yeah, you know, the SLN, we have 3 main focus areas that we often refer to as like the 3 legs on the stool that hold the SLN up. Research, trying to get more and better research on the experience of siblings. Second, policy and advocacy, really trying to get the sibling voice at the policy table. And third, support and information, really connecting siblings with that peer support and information that they need. We've been working to build an inclusive sibling community, and this means creating a safe space where siblings who are Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, and siblings from other traditionally marginalized and underrepresented communities can join together and share stories, learn about resources, and receive information, validation, and support. We partnered with the Sibling Support Project and the Special Needs Siblings to launch 4 BIPOC sibling roundtables since November of 2020. Also, we created an SLN Equity and Inclusion Scholarship Fund in April to remove financial barriers for siblings from all walks of life to attend our SLN conference. And we just launched a new monthly podcast series. We kicked it off with an interview with the renowned Don Meyer. And our podcast is really another way for us to share more stories and perspectives about the sibling experience. Next, what we want to do, really following the momentum of our SLN conference, we want to continue to build connections and provide support to siblings. We saw that siblings want more spaces to connect with each other and talk. We already provide webinars throughout the year for information that we share, but we see a need for more open spaces for siblings to talk and share. So we're thinking of creating SIB symposiums where we have specific topics for siblings to come together online and then just have an open space to talk with each other about the topic and get information and peer support. And we were amazed that we reached siblings from, I think it was 16 countries who registered for our SLN conference. And we want to do more to build collaborations across the international sibling community. And I'd love to work with all of you to hold an International Sibling Summit in the future to more intentionally bring together the work happening to support siblings around the world. Thanks, Katie.
That sounds really great. We can be the first trial run of an international type summit today. The note of increasing diversity and representation in sibling support is also something that came through really strongly in my research, not only among the USA-based sibling organisations, but also in several of the other countries as well. It seems to be one of the big areas that people are turning their attention to right now, and rightly so, because it's great to see more of that happening. Helen from the Sibling Collaborative in Canada, what are you guys up to and where are you going next?
Thank you. So the Sibling Collaborative works to support siblings in 3 specific areas. So the first thing that we try to do is help to build connections. So usually, like, parents will connect with each other when their child receives a diagnosis, but siblings very rarely connect with each other, maybe for the first time when they're in middle age or when they're in a crisis. So we are really focused on bringing siblings together. We do that through virtual meetups. We run 3 virtual meetups a month where there's a facilitator and siblings can come and talk about the topic that the facilitator has put forward. We also have a one-to-one peer support or mentoring program. We have an online community, much like SibNet, although it's the mini version. There's only a few hundred Canadian siblings on that board, and we do keep the topics focused, more Canada specific. So our first area is building connections, and then our second area is about understanding finances and funding. So probably like in every country, the funding is really complex and a lot of siblings worry a lot about, what's going to happen, how are they going to be able to afford to support their sibling when their parents have passed away. So we're doing some work on that now. We've been really lucky. We received a 3-year federal grant, and we've just started this project. We're about 8 months in, where we're going to be building some learning that siblings can take to learn more about the landscape of funding and finance in Canada. So in the whole focus of that project is how can brothers and sisters contribute to the well-being of their brothers and sisters with disabilities living in poverty. So I'm sure it's the same in many countries around the world, but if you have a disability, just by the nature of having a disability, you're likely living in poverty or near poverty. And then the third area that we focus on is mental health. So we're really lucky. The Sibling Collaborative is partnered with the Center for Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto and the Israeli Neurodevelopment Center and Dr. Yona Lensky. Through that connection, because Dr. Lensky is also a sibling, so we have a very strong personal connection as well as professional connection. We've done a lot of research into understanding the sibling experience in Canada, and most recently, the impact of COVID-19 on the sibling relationship. So we have that lovely connection. And also through CAMH, or the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, which we call CAMH, we will be in the fall offering acceptance and commitment therapy in groups for siblings. So we're really excited about being able to deliver that. We don't serve young siblings. I mean, we do welcome siblings from 18, as I said in my intro, from 18 all the way up to over 70. But recently, we've had the good fortune of connecting with a very large and established disability organization that does have a program for youth siblings. So they say 18 to 29 is a young adult sibling. And that group is focused specifically on advocacy, how to teach young adult siblings to be advocates for their brothers and sisters. And they've been able to get meetings with different ministers and been in front of provincial networks and have welcomed us to come along as part of that continuum of, young until when you get older and may enter into a caregiving role. So we're also focused on increasing our diversity. Canada is just such a large and very, very diverse country. And we have, a third of our population is Francophone. So we have started offering one of our 3 virtual meetups is in French. But, you know, breaking into that whole Francophone community has its challenges if nobody in your staff is a Francophone themselves. So we have 2 bilingual folks at the Sibling Collaborative, me included, but you know, you do need to understand the Quebec community in order to really get in there and meet the siblings that may need your services. So we're very focused on that, and other culture groups inside different communities in Canada. And we're excited about potentially partnering with other countries' organizations. I mean, already we've benefited from the generous knowledge exchange of SIBS UK, and also the Sibling Leadership Network has been great in sharing their experience with us and their connections, and we've really benefited a lot from that, and I'm sure there's a lot more that we can do. I think we're all trying to get to the same place, so we might as well build on each other's great work moving forward.
Fabulous. Thank you, Helen. Ify from SOS Needs in Nigeria, do you want to go next?
Certainly. Thank you, Amy. Okay, so like everyone's saying, I just want to commend everyone before I even start talking. It's amazing hearing what everyone's doing. So a lot of the work we've been doing in Nigeria has been geared towards changing the inclusion and education policies, and it's been really hard because there really isn't anything at the moment that's geared towards that. And the reason is because the society here is still dealing with a lot of cultural mistakes and stigmas, especially where it has to do with children with intellectual disabilities. And so you have situations where you have these policies in place, but certain organizations or certain governmental ministries will not allocate them because they still think that most of these things are fetish or, you know, spiritual inclined. So we're having to contend with all of that. And the intention that I had moving back from England was because I had been a special education needs and disabilities lawyer, and I've been exposed to what it means there and how it's shaped the policies in the UK. What we wanted to do was a bridge for families here, and also to educate both the families and educate the government's ministerial government here on the policies that should help to create an inclusive society. So it's still a lot of baby work. And when we started, we created a three-arm policy that has been focusing now on advocacy, so advocacy awareness and trainings both for families and siblings, and also family reorientation. So it's been a lot of work, but it's been amazing the amount of families that want to be involved with it. We're creating something that is not just for Nigeria alone. It's a policy that's going to work for other African states. And we've been lucky enough to use and utilize our social media mediums in creating bi-weekly shows like the SOS Needs shows, the SOS International Sibling Podcast, the SOS Sit Down. So we've been having a lot of conversations with people from all over the world just to help highlight what it is that we don't have going on, or what it is that we would like to have going on here in Nigeria. And it's been very popular. It's been very transparent on what it is that's going on. We're currently working on a disability policy with the government now that would see an increase in facilitating diagnosis centers and research centers that would help. So I'm very interested in the work that everyone's doing, and see where we could work together and help evaluate or help heighten what we can also do here, seeing that most people are probably gone ahead and gone far with their own policies and their own teaching. So really lovely. That's where we're at the moment. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Ify. If you could put a link to the show and the podcast in the chat, I would be interested in having a look, and I'm sure there would be a few others who would be as well, or rather listen.
Awesome, I will.
Thank you. Piyush, what is Safi up to and where are you going in the future?
So broadly speaking, we first focused on sibling visibility in India. So this we have achieved to a good extent right now, and like it gives us immense happiness when we see other organizations including siblings in their support canvas. However, what we have really focused on from day one is opening up siblings, basically somehow making the siblings speak up, encouraging them to take out whatever has been stacked inside possibly for years. Another opening up is the opening up of doors. Opening up doors is talking on topics which are difficult to talk to. For instance, navigating the marriage process for non-disabled siblings like us, or having that talk with your parents regarding the future planning, the first talk, or discussing about the sexual concerns and safeguarding from abuse in residential facilities. Then moving on to how to manage at home as a sibling, how to manage at home when a family member is hospitalized or after the death of a family member. So these are the things we have been doing. So our approach has been, the more stigma attached to a particular topic, the more challenging a topic is, the more we try to address it head on, more openly, without fear, so that we break the shackles and at least there is some start of conversation or discussions around the topic. And we have also worked, not exactly worked, but encouraged siblings to speak up about their mental health challenges and how did they overcome it. So that was also a part of opening up. And moving ahead, I would like to say in India, there is a difference. We have to strike a balance between doing basic awareness among the society and even among the siblings regarding what is intellectual and developmental disabilities. And we also have to do sibling support. We cannot just do the sibling support. We have to work on both the fronts simultaneously. So this, I think, is somewhat different from other organizations. And we have majorly worked on adult siblings till now. Now we wish to move on to young siblings, school-going siblings. And we are still ideating it, figuring it out how to do. So again, here, connecting this to my previous point, we cannot just go into schools and do that. We have to develop some groundwork. Even with the teachers of the school, like they still don't know what is autism. Like 20 years back when I was 6, like I asked my class teacher, what, you don't know about autism? The same thing is there now also. So that is the thing. And then additionally, we are also interested in working on something we call as SIPreneurs. That is the sibling pairs who are into entrepreneurship. How they can help other sibling pairs get into it, possibly collaborate and make a brand of themselves, and like really it open the employment channel. This is the thing. And lastly, we are now trying to include the siblings angle in the curriculum of disability sector professionals. So this is what we are looking forward currently. And we haven't been able to do much work due to COVID right now, but we did do some COVID support sessions. And we are blessed to have siblings who really jumped in to help each other during emergencies. Thanks.
Thanks, Piyush. I was on mute. Thanks for your answer. Really interesting to hear about what you're doing. And finally, Kaya from Taiwan, what is your group up to and where are you going next?
Sure. So I set up a website. It's called the Taiwanese Sibling Information Network to provide informational support. With that focus, we're able to archive sibling stories, survival tips, event information, event report, research results in plain language for people to explore and visit. So it really serves as a hub for sibling support informations. And I attribute it to my past experiences working on the research committee of the SLN. So I want to talk a little bit about the mechanism in case anybody else wants to do it too, because we all are working it voluntarily, so it's not a lot of time. I recruited 3 other siblings to serve on the editorial board. They are a psychologist, a social worker, and a special educator, and me on the research end. And the mechanism is one of us will either write up the article or invite somebody else to write up the article, and another member will review. So we feel like we can always get a second opinion to make sure the articles posted on the website are meaningful for siblings. Periodically, we'd co-author articles together, and everything is done with Google Doc, and we have a Google spreadsheet to index everything. The group also partnered with a social welfare foundation to host adult sibling workshops, in-person workshops, and we give out lectures. We also have synchronous and asynchronous online chat room. And because the support group was based in Taipei, a couple of siblings have moved away since then. So we started the bi-monthly virtual session, which really comes in handy during the pandemic. And as for the future directions, some siblings really requested for an online community, just like the SIDNet and all of the initiatives from the other countries have been doing. But we really hesitate to create one just because the 4 of us have our families, 2 just had their newborns, and 2 of us had to take care of parents and grandparents, in addition to siblings and also our jobs. So I guess the issue really is allocating the manpower to do this, because we really, really want to do a good job if we want to open up an online community for siblings. Thank you.
Thanks, Kaya. And that's certainly another theme that resonates across the globe. You know, even before they start running sibling support organizations, siblings are already that, you know, sandwich generation that we talk about, who are already doing so much. And when sibling support organizations so often depend on, you know, the passion and volunteer hours of siblings who are already doing a lot, how do we fit this in a sustainable way with the lives we already lead? It's a challenge everywhere. Next question that we're going to move on to is one about policy context. So the question is, what is the disability and family policy context in the country that you're in? What does this mean for the sibling support you provide? Just a note to the panelists, we're running a little bit behind time. So if you keep your answers quite tight, that would be good for making sure that we can answer some of the audience's questions as we get through towards the end. Just looking at my list. Fee, would you like to go first this time?
Okay, I was finding it hard to unmute there. All right. Can you hear me now? Awesome.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So just to keep it brief, I think just like anybody else, what people would like to see here, I mean, the way a society treats the most vulnerable people living in a society says a lot about society. And that's all we're working towards, and that's all we're looking at having. We have a desired idea of what the policies here would be. So I'm talking from a context of us not having a working policy at the moment, but then we don't know what the future would be. We're hoping that what we're working on now would be what it is that the government would approve, because we know it's what families would see. I have a younger sister, like I said earlier on, she's 26, autistic, haven't benefited from any policy at all from the country. So I know firsthand what it means to want to have these things in place, and I'm hoping that they will have this in place. So I don't have a pre-notion of what it will be. It, as of now, it's just a desire. So I would allow other people to go and just go in the comments so I can learn more.
Now I'm on mute. Thank you, Iffy. Helen, you want to go next?
Thank you. Yes. So, you know, in Canada, the policy context is really complex, probably the same in other countries. We have, you know, different provinces and different territories, and the policy context is different in each one. Plus we have the federal government and then the governments for all the provinces and territories, and there's a lot of tension between those two levels of government. So what ends up happening is most things end up getting downloaded onto families. And then in turn, after that, gets downloaded onto siblings. So, you know, the federal government looks at things like human rights and, you know, the Charter of Rights and Freedom, but then the provinces need to implement the services. And what ends up happening is, at least in Ontario, where I live, a large number of well-established organizations receive the bulk of the funding. And then they can only serve a limited number of people. And if you don't like what's on their menu of services, such as day programs and things like that, you need to go out and create it for yourself, for your own family. And so that's how things end up getting downloaded onto family members. So I think I'll leave it at that, just to say that it's very complicated. And I actually should also mention that I have said this before, but in Canada, just by the nature of having a disability in Canada, you're going to be living in poverty or near poverty. There's so many restrictions around how you can receive and keep money and spend money, that just grinds people down, and there's not a lot of ways to overcome that. So that's why the Sibling Collaborative is focused on that project around funding and finances, because we think that there must be a way to overcome this. We don't know what that is yet. Maybe we'll find it, maybe not, but nevertheless, siblings could be an important part of the team, family caregiving team or family support team, to sort of deal with all the policies that make lives of people with disabilities in Canada so complicated and difficult.
Thanks, Helen. Claire, you go next.
I think I would reiterate what Helen just said, that it's a really complex picture, actually. Yet there is a legal framework in the UK for assessing needs of siblings under the Children Act, as young carers under the Children and Families Act. There is carers legislation that relates to adult sibling carers. But I think the main issue is that lots of siblings don't consider themselves as carers. They see themselves as brothers or sisters. And so I think a lot of the work we do is in trying to support siblings to access the support that is available. And I think there's huge pressure on services. I think that there was pressure before the pandemic in terms of getting the right service for your brother or sister and battling for some of those services. I think that the pandemic has amplified those difficulties for adult siblings. So having that legislation, having that framework, of course, is hugely helpful for us to refer to, but it's again trying to pull those pieces together for siblings. There is also a concentration here on a whole family approach. I think it's greatly talked about in policy circles. In reality, I'm not quite sure that it really happens. And we often refer to, disabled people and their families rather than specifically talking about siblings as a group. So I think there's work for us to do, and something that Kate touched on earlier in terms of sort of campaigning, lobbying, working with politicians, getting them to understand the nature of the role of a sibling is really important, and some of the work that I've been doing recently. But I think, yeah, we've got a long way to go. I'll try and keep it brief.
Thanks, Claire. Kaya, what's the policy context in Taiwan?
Sure. There's not a lot. The Civic Code in Taiwan provides that siblings are responsible to support one another. We do have some statutes protecting entitlements to siblings who are primary caregivers. However, just like Claire was mentioning, a lot of the siblings wouldn't self-identify as a primary caregiver so long as their parents, usually the moms, remain alive, even if the siblings are really doing the work. All financial subsidy is geared toward the person with disabilities. So when it comes to providing resources, I just don't think there's a lot out there. I'm personally trying to bring in some future planning curriculum as well as training materials from the other countries.
Really, really interesting. Thank you, Kaya. Kate, what's happening in Australia? I know the answer, but the others don't.
Well, we've had a major change in our disability policy landscape in the last few years, where in the past organisations would have block funding and they would support people with disability and their families, and they had some flexibility with that family part of that. And as you say, Claire, there's so much rhetoric in Australia as well that government always talks about people with disability and their families, but if we drill down, it's usually parents. It doesn't extend to siblings, and that's something that we're doing a lot of work on. And how that has now changed is that people with disability access money to then buy whatever services they want. And in theory, that sounds wonderful, that there would be some competition, you'd get rid of the bad providers. But it is one of those situations, again, that if you're very capable or you've got very capable advocates, family members working with you, then people with disability can access great packages and access services. But there's a lot of people who are really struggling to access those services. And one of the downsides of that change has been that in the past, as I said, organisations had some flexibility with funding. So, often I was asked to present to parents and professionals, run workshops, whereas that's all stopped with this new policy framework. And so there's been a real change, and I think we're still trying to work through that, and there's been a lot of problems with it. There's been some really good things through the NDIS, as it's called. It's supposed to be an insurance scheme. So yes, good and bad. And I guess one of the things a couple of you have mentioned about carers, and one of the things that in Australia people do try at a policy level to include siblings under that young carer policy umbrella, which we're very against. There's obviously some overlap, but I think that if we go down that route, then we miss so many siblings. And we try and argue that, yes, there are a lot of siblings who are providing caregiving, but that the relationship itself is just as important, even if they're not providing caregiving per se, but that this relationship is important in terms of social inclusion, safety, well-being, all of those sorts of things. So we try and encourage people to see that, yes, there's some overlap, but we can't just put all siblings under that care umbrella. It just it just misses things. And so, you know, we're lucky in Australia that, you know, in compared to a lot of countries, we do have, you know, probably more resources, but often, as I said, families don't have the capacity necessarily to access them. And so there's still a lot of work to be done in terms of improving that policy and moving that whole family approach to more than rhetoric, so that people actually do take a whole family approach.
Thanks, Kate. It's a policy context I'm well familiar with, coming from Australia as well, but it's always interesting to hear the Siblings Australia summary of how we fit in and what it means in terms of, you know, disability and family policies that are out there. Yash, what's happening around policy for siblings in India?
Yes. So talking about policies for persons with disabilities, we do have Rights for Persons with Disabilities Act 2016, after which accessibility in built environment and digital accessibility is really taken seriously now. Then in future planning perspective, we do have another act known as National Trust Act, wherein there are schemes on residential facilities, respite care likewise. And it is also the body which facilitates the legal guardianship process. But what about caregivers? Like at policy level, there isn't much for the caregivers, and there should be a balance. Now talking about parents, they do have the disabled child can be included as dependents, and there can be tax benefits, medical benefits, or sometimes there can be considerations in official transfers from one place to other. But this is not there for the adult sibling carers. Like this is something the adult siblings want. So this is not there. And at policy level, the word sibling is still not there in India. This means that we now have a very good chance of making this happen, as we now have a community in the form of Sarthi, and we can potentially make this happen and go towards something like flexible working in workspaces. And then I would like to say that in health disparities also we have a long way to go. And I would really like to see siblings taking the leadership in this, like in doing this. And lastly, talking about future planning, particularly residential aspect, we do have many residential facilities coming up, especially from the past 2 years. But practically speaking, we still don't have many services to cater the diversity of population we have in India. From socio-economic point of view, it's just too expensive for the middle class families. Then imagine what can be the scene in lower income families. So this is a major challenge in India, which people are realizing right now. And so what I wish to convey is that though I've talked about a lot of voids, but I wish to convey it in the form of opportunities. There is a very big open space in India to work, a lot of things to work here. Thanks.
Thanks, Piyush. And finally, Katie, what's happening policy context in the USA?
Sure. I can relate to what so many of the other panelists are saying. And the policy context in the US, I feel is very similar to the way Helen described it in Canada. You know, the policy, there are policies in the US focused on people with disabilities, but often what it does is it creates a barrier between the person with a disability and the family, because so much of the service system is focused on the person with a disability. And we really want to shift that to be more person-centered and family-centered, that whole family that Kate, you were talking about. And we still have a long way to go with that. One great example is our family leave policies. The definition of family does not specifically include siblings. And so we've been advocating for that. Additionally, the need for more future planning supports for families, and a lot of COVID-related advocacy that we've done around access to healthcare and access to the vaccine and things like that. We have at the SLN been creating a community of advocates to make change. We have a policy and advocacy committee that's developed a lot of great resources, including an advocacy toolkit. And we have great partners, including the Self Advocates Becoming Empowered, which is the national self-advocacy organization for people with intellectual disabilities. And we have a representative on our board of directors for that. There's just still a lack of acknowledgement of siblings in the US. And it's been challenging, for us as an organization, even to find funding to do work related to siblings. So our organization is still struggling to build capacity. We have 4 part-time people, and altogether, we don't even equal 1 full-time position. It's been interesting with COVID, how there has been some more funding that's COVID related, not sibling specific related, that we've been able to tap into. Some of you have talked about to help disseminate information resources to our network. And that's been really helpful.
Thanks, Katie. A comment at the end there about all of your staff don't even equal 1 full-time position. It's so common across the globe. In the piece of research that I did, the most well-staffed sibling organisation that I spoke to had a maximum of 3 full-time staff. And if you think about that compared to other not-for-profits or non-government organisations or charities, it's pretty small. So it's a common story. Really interesting to hear the different policy contexts from across the different countries on the panel. I think clearly one of the biggest challenges for siblings across the world is actually just being recognised in policy. We tend to get subsumed under labels of family or caregiving that don't necessarily recognise the intricacies of actually the real sibling identity. And then that makes it difficult for siblings themselves to identify with that identity as a group. And so it's interesting to see the interactions between individual experience and policy experience and how those two inform each other as well. They're not such separate things. They really make an impact on each other. We're going to move now to, I think, one of the most exciting questions for this panel, which is what opportunities there might be for international collaboration in sibling support going into the future. What kind of international collaborations would you like to see? What would you like to learn from the work of others? Where do you think you might be able to help each other? What does international collaboration look like? How does technology enable it? How does technology make it hard? How do time zones make it hard, which I'm sure some of the late night, early morning people on the panel are probably feeling right now. And yeah, what can we do? Is there anyone who wants to put their hand up to go first this time, or should I just call on someone? Push, hand up, go ahead.
Yeah. So many a times when we start something new, people, both the society and the siblings themselves, are unable to understand the intent, and it kind of becomes lonely for the person seeding and nurturing the plant, like me. So I think we should have a global leadership camp once in a year, wherein sibling leaders who run networks in their countries or are yet to begin and highly interested can learn from the already established sibling organizations. It will not only open up their minds, but also boost their confidence. And because of this, sibling support can potentially start in many countries in times to come. And there can be a channel made where sibling network leaders from different countries, particularly emerging networks like Safi, can seek guidance, can ask how to go about making changes in their countries, and also learn how to solve organizational level challenges, and how to go from words to action, from resources to action. For example, we can learn very much from SLN on how to do advocacy, from SIBS UK and Siblings Australia about supporting young and college going siblings. Again, it should not be exactly telling the leaders what to do, because that they will figure out themselves, but it is giving them the much needed strength and inspiration to figure it out. Lastly, this will also develop a sense of personal well-being, which the leaders often forget. So mental health, well-being of the change makers is very important. That is what I wanted to convey. Thanks.
Fabulous. Thank you, Piyush. I like the idea of the different sibling support leaders from across the globe training each other in the things that they do. I think that makes a lot of sense. Who wants to go next? Yeah, Helen.
I was just going to say that I would love to work with other sibling groups on program creation. I mean, I heard Kaya say that you're building a curriculum in future planning. Well, we're doing that too. And I know that in Korea, Chung-Un Lee has also built a curriculum on future planning, as have some folks at Boston University. So there's no sense in all of us recreating the wheel. We might as well build on each other's great work, and it just makes it easier, especially also because we're not likely all first in line for funding. It just makes the pressure, it reduces the pressure. It's just, how do we know what each other is doing? I don't know how we would ever figure that out unless we had some sort of board, or I don't know, like Slack, or I'm not sure what. I have, in the 3 years that the Sibling Collaborative has been emerging, we have leaned very heavily on SLN and on SIBS UK because they've been around already for 20 years and have a lot of wisdom and knowledge to share, and they're very generous organizations. So we thank them for that, for sure. And but how do we spread it around? I mean, just because they've been around for 20 years doesn't mean that an emerging organization like ours doesn't have a lot to share as well. So I think it's really a question of figuring out, like, how do we inform each other of the work that we're doing, and yeah, find the right time zone in which we can connect.
Fabulous. I think Evie had her hand up to go next.
Thank you. Great contribution. I think definitely what Pierre is saying is really true. One thing I would like to contribute is having an international panel of some sort, or training leaders. It's going to really be beneficial. I know for a fact that there's some forums I've been on, and they have Nigerians or Africans spread around, maybe around them, and then this organization do not know how best to relate. And when I've been a guest speaker, it's almost automatic that I am connecting to those siblings that they have around there. So it'll be beneficial when you're connecting with other international leaders, and maybe you have people that are from where they're from, either culturally or countries, that you will better understand how to reach those siblings within your own organization that from those places, because you might be able to now connect culturally. Okay, this is what I can do for this sibling, this is what I can do for that sibling, because this is where they're from and this is what their foundational culture is. So I think it's a really great idea to have that connectivity to be able to work with organizations. Also, for us, it's I think it to be beneficial for organizations that have been around for a long time, because you might make a lot of impact here as well in, you know, bringing in what you've already utilized in your countries to someone like us. We would love that as well. So I think it's important for us to do that. And we're lucky. We're currently, this is a global village now. I mean, just connecting via Zoom, and we're all in different places. This is the right time for us to look at international collaborations. This is the right time for us to be able to, you know, spread that joy from other places and learn about other cultures and learn about other people, so that we're not just out there thinking we're doing so much and not even, you know, seeing where we could impact as well. So I would definitely encourage everyone, if it's something you want to know more about, even if it's just a country or whatnot, let's try and get something going on. But our show is open to all siblings. And we've been lucky enough, we have siblings from all over the world that wants to, be on the show every week. And it's amazing once you connect, you see the similarities, regardless of where you're from. By the time you're talking about your siblings, it's almost like you might as well be living in my bedroom, because this is just, it's almost the same thing. So let's do that.
Thanks, Evie. Really great points about how to share better light across cultural diversity in sibling support. I think it's really important. Kate or Kaya, who wants to go next? Kaya? Yep.
Oh, can I go first? So I can talk a little bit about collaboration in Asian countries. In March 2019, I invited Mr. Don Meyer and Ms. Yasuko Arima, who's in the call actually. I invited the two of them to Taiwan for the first ever sibling conference in Taiwan. And having this kind of international presence here indeed raised awareness on this topic. And I was also invited to participate in the Japanese sibling conferences and online, and I learned a lot about great ideas to facilitate online sibling support groups there. So I think having maybe this kind of international conference, regional ones, could be very helpful. And I also love what Helen's been saying, that when we're doing the same thing, if we're all developing future trend planning curriculum, we might also just put our heads together to identify major components. And maybe there could be a module. And I know each country would face different challenges, but we can still not be reinventing the wheel every time. And if we can have some kind of retreat, then we can have the time to sit down and think through things we want to translate, and culturally and linguistically. And also to think about it this way, we can have it as a relay race. We will have people working on it 24 hours all day long. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kaya. Kate, you're up.
Yes, and Kaya and I have worked together before on a publication, and with Yasuko again, and we ran a couple of conferences many years ago where we had people from the UK and US and Asian countries come, which was really wonderful, but we just haven't had the resources in the last few years. But I think, yes, we could do something like this, fairly regularly, and have it a more informal thing with people from our countries coming together and just sharing a little bit more, where we've got a little bit more time to do that and work out what might be things that we can work on, what we might be able to help each other with, bearing in mind that we're all so stretched, and so just trying to do the work within our own countries. None of us have a lot of time to devote, but I think it is important that we maintain this momentum and do stay in touch. Maybe an informal gathering once a month. Part of the difficulty is the time difference. But I think we can also, think about what possible research we might be able to help each other on, and get more of an international perspective in terms of maybe the impact on siblings and how we might best support them, and learning about how different countries support siblings, and learning from those other examples to take to our own internal country governments to think about. But I think there is, part of the difficulty too is that I think there is a lack of awareness of the impact on siblings. And, if I was to pick on one thing, I think part of the difficulty is how we let people know that siblings are impacted, but they also want to be able to give, because I don't think there's no really good, strong research that talks about the impacts. The research is pretty mixed, and there are articles here and there that talk about, small groups or whatever. So, I think there's some scope there to think about, research, but also in the advocacy space. But then in terms of at a narrower level or an easier level just sharing with each other what we're each doing and thinking about, you know, already when people have been talking, I've been thinking, oh, I'd love to connect with her and you know, share some stuff around that or whatever. So hopefully we can maintain these links. That's one of the pluses of COVID, one of the few pluses where we probably wouldn't be doing this maybe as readily if it hadn't been for COVID, which helped us all move to the online space more readily. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the move to the online space has been really good for international collaboration. You know, it's just as easy to have a Zoom meeting with a colleague in my country as it is to log on to one with someone else, bar the time zone issue. That's the main challenge. Claire, what are your thoughts?
I can only reiterate what everybody else has said. I'd love to see an international network. I think that would just be so fantastic. And similarly, I'd be making lots of notes, thinking, oh, yes, that's something I've been trying to think about. And I think as small organisations, we're often all just firefighting, aren't we? We're just trying to deal what's in front of us. And it's really hard to stand back and think, what's the bigger picture? And so I think this gives such a valuable opportunity. And of course, we're always happy to share anything that we've been doing. And, you know, we can always learn from others too. So I think it just would be wonderful. So yeah, I can only support what's been said so far.
Thanks, Claire. And finally, Katie, what are your reflections?
Yeah, I love all the ideas that everyone has shared, and absolutely agree that I, you know, think there are so many opportunities for us to work together internationally. A few years ago, I had the opportunity with my husband's organization, Little People of America, to meet with other organizations doing work around dwarfism. And we traveled to Germany and all met for this, you know, international summit related to that topic. And since that time, I've been thinking we better do something similar to siblings and all the amazing work happening across the globe. And I absolutely agree now with being able to do things like this virtually. There's even more opportunities. I know that we've really benefited from things that we've already learned from many of you. I mean, Kate, you know, the work you've done with SIBS Australia has been really seminal for us to learn from. We've had great conversations with our colleagues from the UK and more regularly now, Helen, with you in Canada. I really also, I know that, you know, Kaya, you are connected with us through, you know, being on the past board of the SLN and an important connection. Ify, I want to learn so much more about the work you're doing with your show and podcasts, as we are just rolling out a podcast for the first time. And Piyush, you invited me to present at your organization, and I think you have so much knowledge and experience with getting the word out on social media that we can learn from. So I'm just excited about ways we can continue to learn from each other, because I really believe that we're stronger together.
Thanks, Katie. There's been some really exciting ideas that have come up through that discussion. I've been keeping some tiny notes on the side, and I'm just going to read back some ideas because I think there's such a huge variety of things that came up in that conversation that it's worthwhile just recapping them. So we've got sibling leaders training each other, looking at mental health initiatives for sibling leaders, shared curriculum creation, building a more formal international network, better ways of communicating with each other, more regular discussions over Zoom, collaboration for cultural diversity, connectivity for cross-cultural representation, international guest speakers at each other's events, international conference online, and international sibling disability research initiatives. Just hearing that list back, do any of the panelists have any final comments that they want to add, or should we move on?
May I add something?
Sure.
Yeah, so I think it's really important to pay attention to each other's research too, because there's some really great opportunities to perhaps compare research across countries just by the nature of including some questions that might have been in one person's research, including it in your own research. So we've done that with some research out of the UK. Some of the questions that have been used in their research, we're using in ours, and then we'll be able to compare. And I think if that's like a pattern, oh, and similarly with Chung-Un Lee's research into future planning and STEP, we've included some of those questions in our survey that's out right now. So I think just filling that gap that exists in all our countries around sibling research and really understanding our experience. I think we can very easily cross borders with that by, you know, using each other's work in the area of research.
Thanks, Helen. As a researcher, that answer makes me really excited because I think when we start, you know, using the same questions, asking across some of the same themes across cultures, that's when we start to build a really good evidence base from the research findings. So thank you for raising that. Any final comments on international collaboration?
Just one little thing on that is that, you know, maybe one of the things we could do, I think we've shared our websites, but with each other, you know, it might be that we could share some of that research amongst this group in terms of what we've done and individually as organisations. But I just had another little comment, if there's time, about it's a little sort of anecdote about language and working internationally. And I've done quite a bit of work in Italy. And it's interesting that in the early years before they started doing work around siblings, there wasn't a word in their vocabulary for sibling. It was all just brothers and sisters. So for them, and we all have that difficulty of, you know, when you're writing about siblings, you know, you've got to talk about the sibling and then the person with disability or their brothers and sisters, and it can get quite clunky. Whereas in Italy, the term sibling actually means sibling of a person with disability. They actually created the word because there wasn't something in their language already. So, you know, I think there's some of the things that are quite interesting when we start to work across borders. So anyway, just a little anecdote.
I think that's really interesting, Kate. And I think one of the other challenges in terms of language and working across borders is different terms around disability are most acceptable in different countries. So probably one of the clearest examples around that is in Australia. It's generally accepted that person first language is the way to go. So person with a disability or person with disability, although there is a move towards identity first language, which is really commonly used, for example, in the UK. So in the UK, you'd say a disabled person and you'd never say a person with disability. And so when we're working across borders, making some of those cultural differences really clear and being clear that we're not being disrespectful in someone else's culture, we're just following what we've always understood to be the right way in our location, I think is also one of the challenges when you start to cross borders. Amazingly, we are running exactly to the projected time, which never ever happens. So we have 25 minutes left of this panel to answer some of the questions from the audience and have a bit more of a back and forth discussion. There have been some people posting comments in the chat, which have been super interesting and a little bit, someone in the chat says that's because siblings are planners. Yes, we are planners. It comes with the territory, doesn't it? So we do have some questions in the chat, and there's also been some chat in the chat answering the questions as well. I'm just going to pull out a few of the questions that I think resonate with the themes of the panel most closely, and we'll see how many we can get through. First question came from Cindy Tama, And it was a question about running sibling support in Asian and African countries. So she says, I have a question for Efi, Piyush and Kaya. How do you recruit siblings and convince them to start the conversation? As a sibling from Indonesia, where there is still a lot of stigma around disability, especially intellectual and developmental disability in society, I've seen reluctance in siblings to open up. So I'm curious of how it is in other Asian and African countries and what can be done. One of you want to take that question?
Can I start?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so in India, we started something known as Tales of Sarthi, basically sharing sibling stories first, written accounts of what the sibling experience has been. So this was very new for everybody here. Nobody had earlier seen stories from siblings. Sorry for the background noise. From siblings. So this is what we have done. Then we moved on to what we call as SIBS talk, which is different from the SIBS UK SIBS talk. Our SIBS talk is just having, just going to Instagram or Facebook and two siblings or three siblings just chatting with each other, like in the form of interview. So gradually these things got opened up. And another thing is, like Indonesia, we do have stigma here also. Like there is a lot of stigma around intellectual and developmental disabilities. But I think we have used, Sarthi has used its social media presence very, we were lucky to have a very good presence in social media. And somehow the word spread, and even if the siblings in our meetups, they don't speak up, we encourage them to be just there, just be present there. Gradually, as the discussion develops, after 40 minutes or 50 minutes, that particular sibling will speak something by his or her own, that will ultimately open them up. So this is what we have been doing in brief.
Thanks, Piyush. Efi, did you have something to add to that?
Yes, just to highlight what PS is saying, definitely that's a great way to start the conversation. So this is hi Cindy. I wish I could have a one-on-one with you as well. I've been seeing all her questions in the chat box. So Cindy, the way I started the conversation, when I started the conversation with other siblings within the African context, was being open about my own personal experience. A lot of people hadn't heard anyone speak about that part. So pretty much the way we are here in Africa, we're naturally maternal. And what happens is there's no conversation between parents and their children about, we call it passing off. So the kids, pretty much once you're an adult and you have a sibling with either a cognitive disability or intellectual disability or whatever, the parents automatically expect you to take care of them. Society expects you to take care of your sibling. So there's no training, there's no information, there's no resources. I didn't grow up with something as like the SIP shop, so I knew nothing about that. When I did move to the UK, I did get the resources, and those things helped me expose myself to being able to talk about my experience. So when I started SOS Needs and we started the conversation, the way we got siblings to start talking about their own experiences was first being an example of our own experiences and being honest and being transparent and being okay with either being criticized or being looked at as, you know, being more stigmatized of why are you talking about this? People do not talk about this here. This thing's a taboo. But the reaction we got was very positive and very favorable because we put everything out there. And now it's almost, you know, we get a lot of DMs with siblings saying, I want to talk about my experience. And another thing we did was we started encouraging siblings. So what we do pretty much is now putting a spotlight on the siblings as being sort of like superheroes and helping them also grow within their own community to help them understand the impact that they're making in helping other people also grow into accepting who they are and accepting what they can do while they're being trained or being tutored on how to be positive advocates. So that's something that you can also portray. But it starts with you. It starts with you also giving that amp to the next sibling that, it's okay to be in this position and it's okay to experience what you've experienced.
Thank you, Ify. It's such an interesting answer. And I think what I think about when I hear you talking about that and what I read between the lines is how much depends on the sibling leaders to be willing to put themselves out there to make the impact for everyone else, which kind of harks back to Piyush's comment earlier around one of the international collaboration spaces that we might work in is how to support the sibling leaders, because doing that work isn't always easy, and it's not always an easy thing to have to put yourself out there just because you want to run an effective sibling support organisation. Kaya, I saw you had your hand up as well. Did you want to add to the answer?
Yeah, I just want to add a few things. I totally agree with Ify that starting with ourselves can really attract attention. And in Asian culture, which might be a little bit different, is that children, regardless how old they are, they still listen to parents. So my strategy is to go through service providers and reach out to parents. I present it to parents and let them know I am a sibling. This is what I'm going through. I'm here to support your other children as well. And through then, I invited the siblings to be part of the sibling support group. Another interesting observation is, so for Asian population, we tend to warm up very slowly. That's a fact. But once they open up, there's no way to stop them from sharing their experiences and stories. And some people would really feel more comfortable in an online format, in a virtual format, or in a chat. So I guess the bottom line is provide as many ways to be engaging as possible so people feel comfortable to speak up.
Thank you, all of you, for that answer. Looking through the other questions that we have, there are a few questions which I'm going to try and summarize into one from John Kramer, which is about the impacts of political ambivalence, political extremism, misogyny, status of girls and women around the world, and what that means for siblings, and how maybe sibling support initiatives can dovetail with efforts to advance the rights of women and girls across the world. A very complex question. Does anyone have any comments on it, or comments on the intersection of sibling support and women's support in general?
I can go. I don't have too much to say on it. I wish I had more to say on it, but I responded to John in chat that even at the Sibling Collaborative in Canada, I mean, in our last research, 95% of our respondents were women. And whenever we have a male come to our virtual meetup, everybody's like, oh, welcome, welcome, because we just see them so rarely. And I think when it comes to advocating for rights, I think where our focus would be advocating for the rights of people with disabilities. We're certainly, advocating for the rights of women and girls is critical too. But I think if we were, just given our limited capacity and how poorly favored people with disabilities are in Canada, that's more likely to be where our attention would go. And I know there are some international disability organizations. I don't know them very intimately, but I wonder if that is a place where, sort of harking back to the last question, where the international siblings cohort belongs. But yeah, I think for us, it's really focusing on disability rights and human rights.
Thanks, Helen. Does anyone else have anything to add to that? Kaya, is your hand up for this question, or was it still up from the last question? Still up from the last question. Okay, I've made that mistake. Katie, yeah, your hand is up. It's a physical
This is Katie.
hand.
Maybe I can just speak a little bit to that. You know, I mean, I think there's definitely a link, you know, where caregivers, you know, are often seen as women and often are women, and are undervalued in a lot of ways. And I think that then also translates to, you know, the work we're doing with siblings. You know, the research still does show that often, at least in the US, the oldest girl in the family takes on the greatest caregiving roles in the family. And so I think there's a big link to that. You know, in terms of, Helen, what you were saying, you know, it's a good question related to ways we could work together with other women's rights organization to kind of push the agenda forward around policies. I mean, I think that it would benefit our work. And so I think it's something that we could think about doing more in that area.
Thanks, Katie. I guess the question that strikes me is, you know, we know that so much of sibling support is often support of sisters. And so as sibling support providers, do you focus your attention on sisters because they are primarily the people who are involved in caregiving? Or is there a need to engage more brothers because they're not there, and that speaks to an unspoken need? And how do you balance those two considerations?
Yeah, we are trying to figure out how to engage more brothers and how to meet the needs of brothers. And we're learning how to do that.
What have you learned?
I think we need new ways of engaging them. I think most of our support is this type of talking to around, you know, our roles and around our feelings. And I think we need to think of new ways of having spaces for brothers to engage with each other and with, you know, the larger group. And I'm open to ideas, new ideas as well.
Yeah, thank you. Ify has her hand up.
Hi, yeah, I think it's very important that we engage more of the men. I've had conversations with male siblings that are, you know, advocates, my brothers as well on the show. And this question comes up all the time to ask if it, you know, is it a societal norm that men feel like women are more nurturers or more caregivers, and that responsibility is sort of like pushed towards them. I know in my society it is, but it's most of the time you think that is the answer they would give, but they'll usually say no, and that they're usually left in the dark. And they're made to seem as though they wouldn't be able to handle it. And so most of the time they also now relegate to the back. So encouraging them to, you know, put in more effort also helps. My younger brother is, you know, to an extent, one of the best caregivers that I would always recommend for something. So one of the things we're doing in SOS is having him lead a male-centered program where he's having to now advocate and train male siblings of what it means to help, sort of like not to put the burden on the women in the family, or to have this notion that the caregiving should be for the women. So I think putting up programs that encourage male siblings would be very, very handy in terms of raising that bar to have more male influence within that context, as well as also encouraging the conversation of making them understand that it's okay for them to come on board. Because I know they're there. You know, you're having the conversations, you're looking at the participants, you know they're there. But most of the time, because it's usually female focused, you tend to relegate them to the back. So encouraging them and, you know, bringing more male panels or encourage more male panels might not make them see sort of like a balance focused on those that are coming on conversations like this, and then maybe speak up more.
Thanks, Safi. I'm really interested in the group that your brother's running. What is he doing differently to try and reach a new male audience?
So we had a very good, influence because we grew up with a dad that, at the time, the way my sister was misdiagnosed and then not diagnosed. So there's no diagnosis center here before we moved to the UK. So we grew up with a dad that didn't know what autism was, but decided to take my younger sister the way she is and love her the way she is and encourage that. So that's the influence where we're coming from. And he saw that. So he grew up understanding what caregiving was, regardless of gender. And that's what he's now having to transition to other men. So he's having to portray different aspects of what he's learned from my dad and my uncles and the male influences around him, and then having to now have these conversations with sort of like triggering answers from different men and having them understand there's nothing like a woman's place in terms of nurturing is both genders, because you want to have both influence in a child's life or an adult's life, regardless of where they are. So those are the conversations he's having. So he does game nights as well. So that are like a lot of boy male bonding things, and then it goes into like a mushy everyone's down to tears situation with them. But yeah, it's different things for him. So it could be a football game and that conversation comes up. It could be a basketball game and that conversation comes up. So he's just having to bring up conversations within the male context of what guys like around him, and then he will bring up those conversations.
Thank you for that. It's really interesting. Your answer is consistent with some research I did into peer support for family members of people with disability generally, included siblings, but also parents. And similar to what you said, one of our key findings was that for fathers to be included in peer support initiatives, often it had to be not centered on the disability experience, but doing another activity, having another shared interest, and then having the disability stuff come up on the side. We're almost at time, and I've seen a bunch of hands from panelists go up. Claire, Kate, and Kaya, you've all had your hand up. So if you could just give a really quick comment each, then we might wrap up after that. Claire, then Kate, then Kaya, in order of who put their hands up.
Brilliant. Yeah, I was just going to reiterate similar points, really. We have been requested from some brothers to have a brothers group here, and it's something I'm looking to try and get some funding to set up, because I think there is a need. And they talked and shared about how difficult it is when lots of the activities that we run are dominated by women, and more difficult to share some of those emotional sort of elements of being a sibling. We've also worked to try and increase the case studies, the stories of siblings that are told by brothers. So we've had some new ones developed recently, and that's something I'm really keen that we do more of. But similarly, I've done some work with fathers in the past, and I completely agree that having different types of activities is really important. I'll stop.
Thanks, Claire. Kate?
I was just going to add to that idea of brothers and mention that, yes, it's so complex because so much depends on the family background. I mean, a lot of these families are actually families where the father has moved away and that they are single parents. Often the father doesn't get the support he needs in the beginning, and so often the marriage breaks down or the partnership breaks down. And I think that can then have impacts if a boy is growing up with a single mother. It can, you know, I think I've seen some siblings who've moved right away because of the fear that they're going to have to, you know, they'll be left with the caregiving. And so it's complex. And I think that, yes, if we do reach out to brothers, I think we have to take it a little bit away from that caregiving role, because I think that can seem a bit overwhelming for them as well. So it's complex, and nobody has has the right answer, but other than it's complex.
I agree. I think there's so much more to being a sibling than only the caregiving element, even though that element is important. Aya, you're the final comment for today before we wrap up. What do you have to say?
Just tagging on what Kate's been saying. So in my group, we actually have more brothers to participate in the support group, but I noticed all of them are the most involved siblings in the family. So could it be that what we're providing in the support group is more enticing and appealing to the most involved siblings? So regardless of gender, I don't know, that may be something we need to think about.
Thank you. It's a really nice note to end on. You know, so often sibling support reaches those who are already involved, but the ones who are not involved are maybe the ones who need more support, precisely because they're not involved. Thank you everyone for your time today. I know that a 2-hour Zoom is a commitment, especially when it's past midnight or 4 in the morning, also just at any time of day. So thank you everyone. I think it's been really exciting to be able to share perspectives in this way. I was reflecting for the panel that it's probably the first time that so many sibling leaders from so many different countries have been in the same room together. And it's been a really exciting opportunity, and it's been an honor to lead it. I hope that we're gonna keep talking and maybe start actioning some of the great international collaboration ideas that we've come up with today. And I'm excited to see where it goes in the future, and grateful to particularly Amy Harm at the Sibling Leadership Network for giving us this opportunity to have a platform to chat today, and for including this as an element in this year's Sibling Leadership Network conference. It's been great, and I'd love to see it repeated going forward again. Thanks so much. Amy, did you want to do the wrap-up comments?
Yes, I'll just add a few comments. Thank you. This has been such a wonderful session, and I feel like a perfect way to close our conference. You know, the SLN conference theme this year was strength through connection. And I just feel like this conversation, this session perfectly encapsulates that theme. And so I'm so grateful to all of the panelists for being here together. I did just see a chat roll through about how to stay connected to some of the organizations that are here. And I'll just make 2 comments. So I think someone said they were just calling in from their phone, so they didn't have access to the chat box. So 2 things I want to say. One is, feel free to send me an email. I've now a bit lost who that was, but I think because I have pestered you all with so many emails, you know where to find me. So please feel free to reach out to, this is Amy Halm speaking. Please feel free to reach out to me and I can make those connections. But the second thing, just so everybody knows, is all SLN conference attendees were provided links to handouts. And in the day 1 folder, in the welcome section, is a list of every panelist who presented at the conference, their email address. And so if there's someone you want to reach out to today from this panel, you can do that there. But again, feel free to reach out to me personally. I'll make any connections that can be made. I want to thank each and every panelist, and especially thank Ariella for leading this in a very thorough and organized manner, allowing everyone to really present important information. And then I want to let you know that we have a conference link for evaluation that's in the chat box. Some of you I know have been with us since the very first day, and we would really truly value your feedback. So the link is in the chat box, as well as a link if you would like to find out more information about SLN membership. But I just, such a warm thank you and good night, good morning, good day to each of you. Thank you for being here. We really appreciate it.